Hey, this is the Tales Beyond channel, where we share real stories with unexpected twists. If you enjoy the video, make sure to subscribe and give it a like. It really helps our channel grow. Now, let's dive into the story. My name is Nick. I'm 26, live just outside of Denver, and I work as a freelance web developer. Nothing too exciting. I've known Alex, my best friend, since high school. He's like a brother to me. And his mom, Mrs. Garner, well, she was just Alex's mom. Always polite, always composed. She'd offer us snacks after school, remind us not to slam the doors, that kind of mom. A couple weeks ago, Alex texted me saying he was heading to Hawaii for 10 days with his girlfriend. I was like, man, you lucky. But before I could hit send, he added, hey, my mom might ask for some help with stuff while I'm gone. She's been moving things around the house. If you're around, could you swing by? Sure, no big deal. I messaged her a couple of days later. Hey, Mrs. Garner, Alex mentioned you might need a hand with something. She replied pretty quickly. Hi, Nick, if you're free, I could use help with the hallway cabinet. It's too heavy for me. Let me know. That was it. Straight to the point. Very her. I pulled up to her house on a Tuesday around noon. It felt weird being there without Alex. Same driveway, same porch, just quiet. When she opened the door, I'll admit, I was caught off guard. She looked different. Not in a dramatic way, just more put together. A bit thinner than I remembered. Hair tied back neatly. Wearing this soft beige sweater and jeans. She looked tired, but elegant. Graceful even. Hi, Nick, she said. Her smile was polite, but faint. Come in. We moved the cabinet, some old oak thing, from the hallway to the guest room. It took 20 minutes tops. After that, I figured I'd head out. But as I turned to grab my keys, she asked, would you like a coffee before you go? I hesitated. I hadn't really expected to stay. But something in her voice, soft, maybe even a little hopeful, made me say yes. We sat at the kitchen table. I'd been there 1,000 times, but never like this. She made us coffee and we talked. Not small talk either. She asked about my work, if I was still seeing anyone, what I thought about living alone. I don't know why, but I opened up more than I usually do. And she did too. At one point, she looked out the window and said, almost to herself, this house feels too big sometimes. Too quiet. There was a pause. I wasn't sure what to say, so I asked, do you ever think about moving? She shook her head. No, it's not the house. It's me. I don't know. I'm still adjusting to not being needed all the time. There was something in the way she said it, like the words had been sitting inside her for a long time. Then she looked at me and smiled. Thank you for helping today, Nick. Really? That smile lingered. And for the first time in my life, I didn't see her as just Alex's mom. I saw her. The next morning, around 9:30, my phone buzzed while I was drinking coffee at my desk. I figured it was a client. But when I looked, it was her, Mrs. Garner. Hey, Nick, I found some old photo albums while cleaning the attic. Thought they might make you laugh. If you're free later, stop by. I stared at the message for a few seconds longer than I should have. I wasn't sure what to make of it. It was casual, but not exactly. Not the kind of text you send just anyone. She didn't usually reach out like that. But then again, yesterday had been different too. She'd open up a little, and so had I. Maybe that's all it was. I thought about it for a bit, then typed back. Sure. Around 2. Her reply came almost instantly. Perfect. At 2 o'clock, I pulled into the same driveway I'd parked in dozens of times before. But now, I was hyper-aware of how quiet the street was. No Alex. No noise. Just me and her. She opened the door before I even rang the bell. She was wearing this deep blue button-up blouse and light jeans. Nothing fancy, but she looked, well, beautiful. There was no denying it. Natural. At ease. Come in, she said with a warm smile, stepping aside. On the living room coffee table, there were 3 thick albums stacked neatly. I sat down on the couch as she picked up the first one and opened it on her lap. These might embarrass Alex if he knew I showed them to you, she said with a small laugh. One by one, she flipped through the pages. Baby pictures, school portraits, random snapshots. Some were silly, others so old they were starting to fade. I found myself laughing at the ones of Alex, wearing oversized glasses or crying during a haircut. We were both laughing, actually. But in between the laughs, she started telling me the stories behind the photos. She talked about raising him alone, about the sacrifices. She wasn't complaining, just reflecting. There was something honest in her voice, almost like she was remembering pieces of herself she'd buried. "I worked 3 jobs the year he turned 9, she said, pausing on a photo of a birthday cake. "I remember baking that cake at midnight. I was exhausted, but I didn't want him to think I forgot." She smiled at the photo, but her eyes looked far away. Then came the silence. I didn't break it. I could feel something shifting in the room. Finally, she said, "You know, sometimes I wonder who I would have become if I hadn't spent every ounce of myself raising someone else." She glanced up at me, like she was worried she'd said too much. "It's not regret," she added quickly. "I love my son more than anything, but I never really had a chance to live just for me." She stood up and walked into the kitchen, saying something about tea. I followed her, unsure of what to say. At the counter, she kept her back to me as the kettle heated. Then, without turning around, she said, "I know it sounds selfish, but I want to feel something again. I want to laugh without guilt, dance without a reason, just be me." I stood there, unsure, not of her, but of myself. Finally, she turned around and looked at me. Her voice was quieter now. "You're the only one I've said this to. You're not family, but you're not just some guy. You're someone who listens, someone who sees me." I swallowed hard. I didn't expect this. Then she asked, softly but clearly, "Would you go out with me one night? Not a date. Just help me feel normal again." It wasn't even a hard decision. I just nodded. "Yeah," I said. "Tell me when." And in that moment, she looked younger than I'd ever seen her, like a piece of her had come back to life. The next few days felt like they passed in a blur. Work was busy, but my mind kept circling back to what Mrs. Garner had said. The request she made, asking me to go out with her, kept replaying in my head. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just reaching out to a friend for some company. After all, she had been through so much raising Alex on her own. A night out was probably just what she needed, right? But I couldn't deny that the whole thing felt off. I'd spent a lot of time at her house over the years, but it had always been with Alex around. There was a certain boundary, a natural distance between us. Now she was asking me to cross it. She texted me the night before. "Nick, how about Friday? Dinner at 7 o'clock. I read the message a few times. Friday seemed so soon. I still hadn't fully processed the conversation we'd had, but she seemed excited. She was waiting for my answer, and I couldn't leave her hanging. "Sounds good." I typed back, my fingers almost shaking. The next day, I found myself at her door, a little nervous. She opened it with that same warm smile, but this time there was something different about the way she looked at me, almost expectant, ready for an adventure. She said, her voice light, "Ready for an adventure?" It was different the way she spoke. There was a playful edge to it, something I hadn't heard from her before. She was dressed in a simple black dress, her hair styled in soft waves, looking elegant without trying too hard. She didn't look like the woman I'd known as Alex's mom. She looked like someone else, someone I'd never met. We drove to a small local restaurant, one of those places with low lights and candles on the tables. It wasn't fancy, but it had an intimate vibe to it. As we sat down, the conversation came easily, almost too easily. She was relaxed, not the woman I remembered from before, always busy with housework and errands. She was someone new. "So, how's work?" she asked, sipping her wine and looking at me with genuine curiosity. "Good. Busy but good," I said, trying not to sound too awkward. We talked about everything and nothing. She asked about my family, how I liked living on my own, the usual things people ask when they don't know where to start. But it wasn't the questions that caught me off guard. It was the way she looked at me. She didn't seem like she was just making conversation. She seemed like she really wanted to know me. As the night went on, I started to feel like I was looking at her differently. I noticed the way she smiled when she laughed, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her memories of raising Alex, the way she paused for a moment before sharing something personal. "You know, I don't do this often," she said, her voice quieter now. "I don't go out. I never really did. I was always busy taking care of Alex, making sure everything was right. I didn't have time for me." There was a heaviness in her words, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't regret, but a sort of longing. She was reminiscing about the life she hadn't lived, a life she put aside for everyone else. "I get that," I said, trying to keep the tone light, but I couldn't ignore the sincerity in her voice. We finished dinner, and as we walked out of the restaurant, she touched my arm lightly. It wasn't something casual. There was meaning behind it. "I needed this tonight, Nick," she said softly. "More than I thought I did." Her eyes locked with mine, and for a brief second, I felt that pull again, stronger than before. She was right there, standing in front of me, not just as Alex's mom, but as herself. A woman who had her own hopes, dreams, and apparently, regrets. I didn't know what to say. How could I? She gave me a small, almost shy smile, and we both walked to the car. As I drove her back to her house, the atmosphere was different. The air felt heavier, charged with something unspoken, something I couldn't ignore. When we got to her house, I parked the car. She didn't immediately get out. Instead, she turned toward me, and for a second, it felt like time stood still. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly. Her voice was gentle, but there was something deeper there, something vulnerable. "You're welcome," I replied, not knowing what else to say. We both sat there for a moment, just looking at each other. Neither of us made a move to leave. I didn't know if I was supposed to kiss her, or if she wanted me to, but the tension in the car was undeniable. Then she finally spoke. "I'll see you tomorrow, Nick," she said, her voice steady again, as though she was regaining her composure. I nodded and got out of the car, walking around to her side to open the door. As she stepped out, she gave me another soft smile, and for a second, I could have sworn there was something else in her eyes, something unspoken. I drove home that night with a million thoughts swirling in my head. She had been different, and so had I. What did it mean? What was happening? I didn't know, but one thing was clear. This night had changed something, and I wasn't sure where it would lead. It had been a few days since our night out, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I saw her, I felt that same mix of confusion and longing. What was this? Was I being too caught up in something that wasn't there? Or was there really something more beneath the surface? I had spent so much of my life seeing her as just Alex's mom. Now she was something else. The way she looked at me, the way she spoke, like there was an entirely different side of her that I hadn't seen before. It wasn't just the mom I had known all these years. It was like she was showing me a side of her that had been hidden away for far too long. But what did that mean for me? I wasn't even sure what I wanted. I had never thought about her like this before. Yet here I was, feeling a connection that didn't seem to make sense. The text came in the afternoon, just as I was finishing up a project. "Hey Nick, I'm thinking about getting out of the house tomorrow. Want to go to that new bar downtown? It'll be fun." I hesitated before replying. A part of me wanted to say no, to pull away, and not risk crossing any boundaries. But then I thought about the last time we hung out. It hadn't felt forced. We had a good time. So why not? "Sure, sounds good. What time?" "How about 7? It was strange, but I couldn't deny the anticipation I felt. I kept telling myself it wasn't anything more than a night out between two people who had known each other for years. But as the clock ticked closer to 7, I realized I was more nervous than I'd ever been before. When I knocked on the door, she answered almost immediately. This time, she was wearing a deep red dress that made her look even younger than she was. Her hair was styled, and she had a subtle but confident smile. "You look great," I said before I even realized I'd spoken. She smiled, and there was that little sparkle in her eyes again, that hint of something else. "Thanks," she said softly. "You're not so bad yourself." We walked out to the car in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was a certain ease between us now, something I hadn't expected. The drive downtown felt different too. The air was thicker, like we were both on the edge of something we couldn't take back. When we arrived at the bar, it was small but had a nice vibe. Low lighting, soft music. We sat at the bar, ordered drinks, and before I knew it, the conversation was flowing like we'd known each other for years. She laughed at my jokes, and I found myself laughing at hers. It felt effortless. "Nick," she said, pausing after a sip of her wine, "you know I don't usually do this. I don't even remember the last time I went out like this." "I know," I said, "but I'm glad you did." She smiled, a little more softly this time. "I'm glad you came with me," she replied. I was trying to keep things light, but I felt this weight hanging in the air, something unspoken, something we were both avoiding. The way she looked at me was different now. It wasn't just friendly anymore. "Do you ever feel like you missed out on something?" she asked suddenly. I wasn't sure how to answer. I had my own regrets, sure, but this wasn't about me. It was about her, and I knew it. "I don't know," I said slowly. "I think everyone feels that way sometimes, like there's something they could have done differently." She looked down at her drink, swirling it gently. Then she looked up, locking eyes with me. "I always put everyone else first," she said quietly. "Alex, my work, everything. But now..." She trailed off. There was a moment of silence, and for a second, I wondered if this was where it was going to happen, if she was going to say something more. But she didn't. Instead, she just gave me that smile again. The same smile she'd given me the other night. But this time, I wasn't sure what it meant. "You're not the only one who feels like you've missed out on something," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. She tilted her head, studying me. There was a long pause before she spoke. "I'm sorry if this is awkward, Nick," she said, looking down again. I don't know. Sometimes I feel so alone in all of this. I never thought I'd be here, you know? I never thought I'd be out with someone like you, feeling like I'm still trying to figure out who I am." I didn't know what to say to that. There was a weight in her voice that I couldn't ignore, something raw and vulnerable. "I'm not going anywhere," I said softly. "I'm here. You're not alone." And as I said those words, I realized something. I meant them. I was here, and for whatever reason, I wasn't ready to walk away from this. But as the night went on, I couldn't help but feel that the boundaries we once had were beginning to blur. Maybe I was crossing a line I didn't fully understand, but at that moment, I didn't care. There was something between us, and no matter how much I tried to deny it, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I sat in my car outside her house, hands gripping the steering wheel. The days had passed since everything between us had changed. At first, I thought it was a mistake, something that shouldn't have happened. But now, as I sat there, I realized that what we had, it was different. I couldn't explain it, and I wasn't sure what it meant yet, but I knew that we had both crossed a line. Now, we had to decide what to do about it. I texted her, "Can we talk?" Her response came quickly. "Of course. Come in." I took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and walked to the front door. She opened it before I could even knock. Her smile was warm, but with a hint of something deeper, something that matched the way I felt. "Hey," she said, her voice soft, but I could hear the tension behind it. I followed her inside, the quiet between us almost palpable. The weight of everything we had shared hung in the air. As soon as we were seated, she turned to me, her eyes searching mine, trying to read me the same way I was reading her. We both knew. "We can't keep doing this, Nick," she started, her voice low. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I think we both know where this is heading." She paused, searching for the right words. "I can't do this anymore. Not like this." I knew exactly what she meant, down to the very breath between her words. We couldn't keep living in this gray space, this fragile, suspended limbo where nothing had a name, but everything had weight. It wasn't sustainable. The connection between us, as real and undeniable as it was, had become too heavy to carry in silence. We had crossed a line, and no matter how gently we tried to step around it, the truth was clear. We couldn't go back. And yet, we also couldn't move forward. Not in the way people do, when they're free to love in the open. What we shared wasn't something that could ever survive in daylight. It had grown quietly, in the hidden spaces of glances and late-night texts, of unspoken words and moments that lingered longer than they should have. And now, it stood trembling at the edge of exposure. "It's not fair to either of us," I said, my voice low, steady, but laced with the ache of reality. "We both have to let go of this, whatever it is, because it was never meant to be anything more than what it already is, a secret. Something sacred, yes, but something that only lives between the two of us. No one else." "I agree," I added, almost in a whisper, the weight of it sinking into the quiet between us. "I've been thinking the same thing. Thus. It can't be anything more. We can't talk about it. We can't tell anyone. We can't let it leave this room." For a moment, the silence felt like a soft thud, like something final had just dropped between us. Then, slowly, her expression shifted. Her eyes, which had been searching mine, softened, not with sadness, but with understanding. She nodded gently, a breath escaping her lips like she'd been holding it in too long. "I don't want anyone to know. Not because I'm ashamed," she said, her voice trembling, catching slightly in her throat, "but because I know what we had is real. It's ours. Something no one else touched, no one else judged, no one else interfered with." She paused, her eyes glistening. "It's private. It's something we get to keep. Just us. A part of my life that belongs to no one else. And that matters to me." I leaned back in my chair slowly, her words circling in my mind. She wasn't trying to deny it. She wasn't burying it. She was holding it gently, reverently. And she was right. This wasn't about shame or guilt. It wasn't about hiding because we were afraid. It was about recognizing that some things are too delicate to survive the world's opinions, too intimate to be dissected or explained. What we had may have existed in the shadows, but that didn't make it any less meaningful. In fact, maybe the secrecy made it even more rare, something beautiful that could never be duplicated. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't asking me to forget. She was asking me to remember, quietly, fully, and forever. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no enchanted ending waiting just beyond the horizon, no sweeping gestures beneath the stars, no cinematic kiss that would make everything right again. This wasn't that kind of story. There would be no happily ever after. Not in the way the world imagined it. But still, there was something here. Something deeply real. Something raw and quiet and completely our own. It was the kind of connection that couldn't be defined, couldn't be boxed up or shared with others, because no one else would ever fully understand it. It existed in the silences, in the stolen glances, in the way our words always seemed to dance just around the edge of what we really meant. And in that stillness between us, I finally found my voice. "I don't want to lose what we have," I said, the words catching in my throat, my voice barely more than a whisper. "But I know we have to keep it this way, in the shadows, hidden, just ours. No one else can know." She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. Instead, she reached out, slowly, gently, and placed her hand over mine. Her touch was soft, but there was a steady strength in it, like she was holding not just my hand, but everything we had been carrying. "We'll keep it between us," she said, her voice calm, yet trembling ever so slightly. "And I'll be okay with that. I promise. I'll always remember what we shared, even if it's just ours to remember." Her eyes met mine, and in them, I saw the same mix of sorrow and grace that I felt in my own chest. There was no bitterness, no regret, just the quiet acceptance of something beautiful that had come and gone like a passing storm. Brief, powerful, unforgettable. There was a quiet comfort in the way she spoke, in the way she held my hand like it was the final page of a story neither of us wanted to close. And it was the same feeling I had. I didn't want to let go of this, not completely. How could I? What we had wasn't a mistake. It was a moment in time that had shaped us both. But we couldn't stay here, suspended in a world that didn't exist outside the two of us. We couldn't go back to how things had been. Too much had changed. We had changed. This was a chapter that had come to an end, but not with pain, not with devastation. It didn't leave me shattered. If anything, it left me still, quiet, changed. We both had our lives to live, separate paths to walk, but those paths had crossed in a way neither of us could undo. And neither of us wanted to. As if on instinct, we both stood. She looked at me one last time, her expression soft and open. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. Her hug wasn't rushed. It wasn't casual. Her arms tightened around me in a way that said everything we didn't have the words for. It was an embrace that lingered just a moment longer than expected, and in that extra second, I felt everything: gratitude, closure, love, and the ache of letting go. Not everything that matters has to last forever. Sometimes it just has to be felt, fully, deeply, and then released. There was nothing romantic about the way it ended. No dramatic goodbye, no confessions whispered between tears, no promises to find each other again someday. It wasn't a scene from a love story. It was something far more human. It was just two people who had once found something rare and unspoken between them, something meaningful, something intimate, and who both understood, without needing to say it aloud, that the time had come to let it go. No one else would ever truly know what we had shared. It lived in the small spaces between our words, in the late-night glances, in the quiet comfort of knowing we could simply be ourselves around each other. As I stepped out of her house that evening, the cool air hit me like a gentle wake-up call. I paused on her porch, my hand lingering on the doorframe for just a second longer than necessary. There was something final in the way the door closed behind me, a kind of silent goodbye I hadn't been prepared for. And yet, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined. In fact, I'm not sure I'd imagined any ending at all. But this one, unexpected, understated, felt right. It felt honest. We had made a choice together. A decision to keep what we had locked away from the world, tucked safely inside the quiet corners of our memories. No one else would ever see it, ask about it, or try to make sense of it. And we were both okay with that. As I reached my car and glanced back one last time, I caught her standing in the window, barely visible behind the curtain. Our eyes met for the briefest moment, and that look, it said everything that words couldn't. There was no need for a farewell. No final words. We understood each other in a way that made spoken goodbyes unnecessary. What we had, what we shared, it was ours. Just ours. And it would always stay that way. As I pulled away from the curb and started driving into the quiet evening, I felt something shift inside me. My heart was a little lighter, not because I was leaving something behind, but because I knew, with quiet certainty, that we had done the right thing. We had chosen our path, not one paved with forever, but one laced with truth. And in some strange, bittersweet way, it was the right one. Our secret would remain untouched, sealed in silence, and that was enough. It's been about 7 months now. 7 months since the day I walked into her house, and everything changed. Sometimes it feels like a dream, like those moments never really happened, like they belonged to someone else. But I know they did. I know what we felt was real, even if it was fleeting. And I've been thinking about that time more than I'd like to admit. It's funny how some chapters of our lives don't come with loud beginnings or definitive ends. They just happen, quietly, deeply, and leave a mark you carry long after the pages have turned. But it's all part of the story now, isn't it? A story that no one else will ever read, but one I'll never forget. We're not in the same place we were back then. And maybe that's the most honest thing I can say. Time has a way of shifting everything, subtly at first, then all at once. Back then, we were caught up in something unexpected, something fragile but electric. But now? Now it feels like we're standing on opposite sides of a memory, still connected, but no longer close. And I guess that's how life works. Nothing stays the same forever, especially not when you're carrying the weight of a secret between two hearts. Secrets don't age gracefully. They grow heavier with time, more complicated. What once felt exhilarating slowly becomes a burden. Over the past few months, I've found myself going over everything. The late nights, the quiet glances, the hush in our voices. At first, I didn't know what to make of any of it. I was caught somewhere between confusion and hope, trying to decide if we had stumbled into something meaningful or something dangerous. But looking back now, with a little more clarity, I understand it better. The truth is, the secret we shared, it was never built to last. Maybe it wasn't supposed to be permanent. Maybe it was only meant to be a moment in time, a pause in the lives we were both trying to lead. And honestly, I've made peace with that. In the beginning, it felt untouchable, like we had carved out a world of our own, hidden in the shadows, away from judgment, away from reality. We met in secret, guarded our time like it was sacred, and lived in the space between what was right and what simply felt real. There was a thrill in it, an adrenaline rush in knowing it was just us. In the stolen moments, the late-night messages, the way time seemed to slow down when no one else was around. It was quiet but intense, intimate in ways we didn't talk about. But over time, that thrill began to change. The spark didn't disappear, but it flickered. And the silence that once felt comforting started to feel heavy. The weight of the secret grew, not just in our words, but in our silences. Not just in our time together, but in the time we spent apart, wondering, doubting, pretending. It wasn't just about keeping it hidden from others anymore. It became about how hard it was to carry it within ourselves. How exhausting it was to act like nothing had changed when everything had. We started to drift. At first, I didn't even notice. It was subtle. A missed message here, a shorter reply there. But then the conversations we used to look forward to began to feel scripted. Like we were trying too hard to pretend we still felt the same. And when we did talk, there was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. A kind of emotional static. Words became fewer. Eye contact became shorter. And connection, real, honest connection, started to feel just out of reach. Until one night, everything unraveled. I remember that night vividly. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. Painfully real. We weren't trying to hurt each other. But we were both exhausted, emotionally, mentally, tired of pretending that what we had was still working when deep down, we knew it wasn't. It was the kind of conversation that starts slow and then spirals, words rising like a tide you can't control. We weren't yelling, but our voices were sharp, our emotions raw. We were angry, but more than that, we were scared. Scared of losing something we couldn't define. Scared of facing the truth we'd both tried to avoid. "I don't know what you want from me anymore, Nick," she said, her voice trembling with frustration, yet edged with sorrow. "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending like this is okay." And in that moment, I had nothing to say. Nothing I could say that wouldn't feel like a lie or a delay. I didn't know what I wanted anymore either. That was the moment it hit me. The realization I'd been avoiding. Maybe what we had, as beautiful and rare as it was, wasn't meant to last. Maybe it wasn't supposed to stretch beyond the pages of the chapter we'd written together. Yes, it was real. And yes, it was powerful. But some relationships, no matter how sincere, are too delicate to carry the weight of expectation. I looked at her, and for the first time, allowed myself to admit what had to be said. "We can't keep doing this," I murmured. My voice was soft, almost inaudible, but it carried every ounce of truth I had left.
And that was enough.
The words just hung there, suspended in the quiet like smoke. And in that silence, we both knew there was no going back. We stayed up for hours that night, neither of us in a rush to leave the moment behind. The room was quiet, the world outside still, and for the first time in a long while, we let ourselves say everything we hadn't been able to before. We talked about the beginning, the sparks that caught us both off guard, the tenderness we didn't expect, the way we slipped so easily into something that felt inevitable even though it was unspoken. We revisited the middle, the times we laughed until our sides hurt, the quiet coffees, the long silences that never felt awkward. The way her voice softened when she spoke about her past. The way I leaned in without realizing it. And then we faced the end. We talked about what we had lost, though we never really had it in the first place, not in a way that could be kept. We had never belonged to each other, not truly. But still, we had lost something. The closeness, the warmth, The illusion that maybe, just maybe, it could have been more. Then came the hardest part, what we wanted moving forward. There was a stillness in her eyes as she spoke, like she already knew the answer, but needed to hear it from me too. I could feel it in my chest, that quiet truth settling in. As much as we wanted to hold on, we knew the time had come to let go. Not out of anger, not out of disappointment, but because holding on any longer would have meant dragging something beautiful through the mud of uncertainty. So we sat in that dimly lit room, facing everything we had been avoiding. And in the end, we came to the same conclusion. Maybe it's time to let go. The words weren't loud. They didn't crash like thunder. They just landed, gently, finally. So we did. There were no ultimatums, no dramatic exits, no broken glass or raised voices. Just a quiet understanding between two people who had shared something rare and knew it couldn't last forever. We agreed, without resistance, that we had reached the end of the road. It wasn't easy to say, but it felt right. It was over, and we both knew it. Looking back now, I find it hard to say if I regret any of it. There are moments I replay sometimes. Her smile when she let her guard down, the unexpected way she made me feel seen, the softness in her voice when she told me things she'd never told anyone else. No, it wasn't a perfect story. It wasn't clean or conventional. And I'm sure most people would never understand the kind of bond we had or the reasons we kept it hidden. But what we had was real. Real doesn't always mean permanent. Sometimes it just means meaningful. And for a time, it was enough. I don't feel bitterness when I think of her now. I don't carry anger in my chest or resentment in my bones. If anything, what I feel is gratitude. Gratitude for the moments we shared, for the connection that grew in the quiet, for the honesty we finally gave each other in the end. It's been 5 months since we made that decision. We haven't spoken since that night. No texts, no calls, not even a silent glance across a room. But I still think about her sometimes, when I hear a certain song, or when I walk past a place we once visited. I think about how things were, about how she made me feel like I mattered, even in the smallest ways. And even though there's a small ache when I remember, I don't regret any of it. We both walked away from it with something. Maybe not a future, but a memory. Not a lifelong promise, but a quiet kind of love that existed, even for just a little while. It wasn't the ending we expected, but it was the one we reached together. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if our paths will ever cross again. Maybe one day, I'll see her across a crowded room and we'll exchange a nod, just a nod, and that'll be enough. Or maybe I'll never see her again, and all I'll have is the memory. But for now, I'm content. Content with how things ended. Content with the peace we found in finally letting go. We made our choices, and when all was said and done, we both moved on. And honestly, I'm okay with that. Thank you for staying with us. If you find it interesting and useful, please subscribe, like, and share so you don't miss the next video. Thanks.